Hello history lovers and welcome back to the channel. My name is Hannah and today we'll be exploring Katheryn Howard's short tenure as Queen of England. Despite Henry's frequent visits to Katheryn's bed in the initial months of their marriage, she did not conceive. It is possible that Henry's advancing age and health issues impeded his ability to father more children. During this period, Katheryn also navigated a complex relationship with her stepdaughter. She felt slighted by Mary, who was better educated than she was and had a higher birth. Mary refused to show Katheryn the respect that she felt she deserved as queen and as her stepmother. So Katheryn retaliated by almost having two of Mary's ladies removed from her service. Mary and Katheryn were seemingly able to sort out their differences for at least a brief while, presumably over Christmas, but eventually those two women were removed from Mary's service at Katheryn's request, much to Mary's distaste. Shortly afterwards, one of the women fell ill and died, which caused Mary great distress, and is probably something that she could never forgive her stepmother for. While her relationship with Mary was strained, she found a warmer reception from the young Lady Elizabeth. Elizabeth, who was 7 years old at the time of Katheryn's marriage to Henry, was related to Katheryn through her mother Anne Boleyn, who was Katheryn's first cousin. The two reportedly enjoyed each other's company during their rare encounters, suggesting a bond that transcended their royal obligations. One of the occasions these two would share was in May 1541, when Katheryn visited her stepdaughter Elizabeth at Chelsea Old Palace, and it was here that she gifted her stepdaughter some inexpensive necklaces. Bit of a kick in the face when you think about how much Henry spent on Katheryn and how much Katheryn spent on herself, and then as the king's daughter you get the cheap stuff.
The cheek, the nerve, the gall, the audacity and the gumption.
By mid-August 1540, Queen Katheryn Howard's household was fully reformed, establishing her court and solidifying her new status. The roster of distinguished ladies appointed to serve her reflected both political alliances and personal connections. Among them were Lady Margaret Douglas, the King's niece, Mary Fitzroy, the Duchess of Richmond and the King's daughter-in-law, high-ranking nobles such as the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, the Countess of Sussex, and Katheryn's stepmother, who was now a widow, were also included. Additionally, Lady Clinton, identified as Lady Elizabeth Fitzgerald, the second wife of Lord Clinton after the death of his first wife Elizabeth Blount, was part of this esteemed group. In the Queen's Privy Chamber, Katheryn retained several ladies who had served Anne of Cleves, such as Eleanor Manners, Countess of Rutland, Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, and Lady Edgecombe. Lady Baynton, the Queen's half-sister, also continued her service from the previous Queen's household. Other prominent figures in attendance included Margaret Howard, Lady Arundel, who was Katheryn's sister, and Lady Cromwell, who was Elizabeth Seymour, Queen Jane's sister. Notably, Mrs. Stoner, who had attended Anne Boleyn during her imprisonment in the Tower, joined. As Queen, Katheryn had the authority to bestow patronage on family and friends, a customary practice for queens, who were expected to enhance their networks and support loyalists. Alongside appointing her sisters and half-sisters, Katheryn sought to include friends from her time in the household of Agnes, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. While there is speculation that Joan Bulmer, who had previously written a letter to Katheryn that some interpret as a veiled blackmail attempt, might have secured a position, although Gareth Russell, one of Katheryn's biographers, suggests that she was never formally appointed. On the 22nd of October 1540 at Windsor, King Henry VIII was startled by a rumour suggesting that Anne of Cleves was pregnant by him, supposedly conceived during their visit to Richmond in August. Thankfully, further investigation revealed that Anne had merely been suffering from an upset stomach, with no truth to the pregnancy rumour. That October, the Queen Consort Act was enacted by Parliament. This legislation empowered Queen Katheryn Howard, giving her the power to act as a woman's soul without the consent of the King's Highness, a significant declaration of Henry's affection for her, As a further demonstration of his love and favour, Henry granted Katheryn all the lands and manors that had once belonged to Queen Jane Seymour, his third wife. On the 4th of December 1540, French Ambassador Charles de Marillac observed that Henry VIII had adopted a new daily routine while staying at Woking Palace. He would rise early between 5 and 6 a.m, attend Mass at 7, and then spends the morning hawking until dinner at 10. Henry confided to Marillac that he felt much better in the countryside than when he was confined to London during the winter months. Henry and Katheryn celebrated Christmas at Hampton Court Palace. Henry's New Year's gifts to Katheryn were extravagant and included 2 pendants laced adorned with 26 diamonds and 158 pearls, a rope of 200 large pearls, a square pendant set with 27 diamonds and 26 clusters of pearls, and a black velvet muffler edged with sable fur, embroidered with 38 rubies and 572 pearls. And yet Elizabeth got the inexpensive necklaces. Many of these jewels had belonged to Henry's previous wives, given that the royal treasury was now depleted, and he could not afford to purchase new gems. Henry's financial constraints were so severe that he was unable to afford Katheryn's coronation, although it has also been suggested that Henry had given up crowning his queens until they'd produced an heir. On the 3rd of January 1541, Anne of Cleves was reinstated at court, where she humbly greeted her new queen, Katheryn Howard. It was incredibly awkward at first, as Katheryn had been Anne's maid of honour, but now Katheryn was queen, not Anne. Katheryn, understandably, was unsure of what to do, as none of Henry's previous wives had to welcome their predecessors.
This is awkward.
Anne, who now held the title of the king's sister, was one of the highest-ranking people in England. But she wasn't actually his sister. The king's biological sisters, Margaret and Mary, had been queen consorts of Scotland and France. Although Mary was dead at this point, so that's one less person to worry about. Either way, Anne currently did not hold such a title, but being the gracious woman that she was, Anne knelt before the new Queen of England and her former maid of honour, at which Katheryn, who I imagine was relieved that Anne had made the first move, begged her to stand. Katheryn graciously bestowed upon Anne a ring and 2 dogs, gifts from the king. Later that day, Lady Mary and Anne of Cleves joined Henry and Katheryn at Hampton Court. While Mary's interactions with Katheryn remained strained, Anne fostered good relations with both ladies. Despite the king retiring early that evening, Anne remained engaged dancing with Katheryn, and the following day she joined them for dinner with Henry. Prior to their reunion at Hampton Court, Anne had sent the king and queen 2 majestic horses adorned with violet velvet trappings, reinforcing her harmonious rapport with the royal couple. On the 21st and 22nd of February 1541, Henry found himself plagued by a painful leg and a lingering sense of despondency that had settled upon him for several weeks. Queen Katheryn, meanwhile, assumed the responsibility of overseeing a court that felt unusually vacant. Despite arrangements for masques on these days, the king opted to abstain from attending. In private, Katheryn diligently attended to her husband's needs, yet his demeanour proved challenging to endure. His melancholy disposition and volatile temperament persisted. Observers remarked on his excessive indulgence in food and drink, noting his tendency to shift opinions drastically from morning to post-dinner. Henry struggled to come to terms with his declining health, grappling with the realization that he was now confined by the limitations of his aging, infirm body. Despite Katheryn's best attempts to lift his spirits, he withdrew even from her, shutting himself off from her presence. Though alarmed by his uncharacteristic behaviour, Katheryn's anxieties were alleviated when by the 19th of March, Henry seemed to have reverted to his old self. That February, Katheryn was moved to action upon learning of the plight of 3 individuals incarcerated in the Tower. Among them was the pensioner Margaret, Countess of Salisbury, who had been there for nearly 2 years. enduring the bitter winter weather, with inadequate clothing and heating to shield her aged body. Upon discovering this, the Queen promptly dispatched her tailor on the 1st of March, commissioning garments to be crafted for Lady Salisbury's comfort. A furred nightgown, a kirtle of worsted, a furred petticoat, a satin-lined nightgown, a bonnet and frontlet, 4 pairs of hose, 4 pairs of shoes, and 1 pair of slippers. With the King's consent, Katheryn funded these provisions from her privy purse. Katheryn also succeeded in persuading the King to grant clemency to Thomas Wyatt, a decision that garnered widespread acclaim within the court. For weeks thereafter, both King and Queen enjoyed the admiration and applause of their peers. Henry was impressed by his wife's compassionate intervention on behalf of the prisoners. Katheryn's public persona as Queen garnered admiration. She was lauded for her grace, charm, and impeccable manners. Her influence was noted positively, particularly in her successful intervention with King Henry VIII to spare the lives of Sir Thomas Wyatt and Sir John Wallop, both of whom were imprisoned on charges of treason. It remains unclear whether Katheryn's intercession was driven by her own initiative, or if it was a strategic move orchestrated to allow the King to alter his decision without losing face, a common practice when queens petitioned their husbands. On the 19th of March 1541, Katheryn Howard made her first formal entrance into London, celebrated with a grand river pageant on the Thames. She moved into Greenwich Palace, and in April shared news that Henry VIII was surely eager to hear. She believed she was pregnant. However, no more was actually heard about this potential pregnancy, so it was either a mistake or an early miscarriage. This was the only instance when serious consideration was given to crowning Katheryn as Queen, a coronation that ultimately never happened. Katheryn's inexperience at court became evident in her management of her household. She failed to reprimand her lady-in-waiting, Dorothy Bray, who was involved in an affair with a married man. As Queen, Katheryn was expected to oversee the morals of her ladies and guide them towards respectable matches. The misconduct of her ladies-in-waiting reflected poorly on her, demonstrating that the young consort either did not grasp or chose to ignore the responsibilities of her role. Katheryn allowed her ladies to behave as they had done during her time at Horsham and Lambeth, without considering the elevated standards required of her as the Queen of England. March 1541 also saw Thomas Culpeper's arrival at court.
Hello there.
Seeking special favours from the Queen. The motivations behind Katheryn's involvement with Thomas Culpeper are open to interpretation. Was it driven by love or lust? Prompted by her attraction to a young, handsome man, in stark contrast to her aged, ailing husband. Perhaps she felt desperate to produce a male heir by any means necessary, to safeguard her and her family's position. Lady Rochford, Jane Boleyn, aided Katheryn in her affair with Thomas Culpeper. On the 14th of April 1541, Katheryn Howard and Thomas Culpeper met in a secret encounter arranged by Lady Rochford. During this meeting, Katheryn gave Culpeper a cap as a gift. However, Culpeper's indifferent reaction, questioning why she hadn't shown interest in him before her marriage, left her feeling disheartened. This meh response caused her to distance herself from him for a while. Nevertheless, by late spring, Katheryn's feelings had resurfaced, and she began sending him platters of food to show her concern when he was unwell. In May 1541, the relationship between Katheryn and Mary, Henry's daughter, began to improve. They began to treat each other cordially, and Chapuis reported that Katheryn gracefully accepted Henry's decision to allow Mary to reside at court. As a gesture of goodwill, Katheryn even gifted Mary a gold pomander adorned with rubies and pearls. On the 30th of July 1541, Katheryn and Henry departed from London for their northern progress. Henry hoped that his presence in the region would inspire loyalty and deter any potential future revolts. the crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of their attractive young queen. Henry was thrilled that his new queen was creating the reaction he had hoped, so much so that he gave his queen a golden brooch for being a perfect wife, a model of virtue and good behaviour. During the northern progress, Katheryn faced the reappearance of Francis Derham.
I got a bad feeling about this.
He arrived at Pontefract Castle with a letter from Agnes, asking Katheryn to give him a position in her household. This request from the Dowager Duchess seemed surprising. Perhaps she believed it would be beneficial for Katheryn to earn her former lover's gratitude, or she might have thought their relationship had been limited to a few kisses and that having Derham around wouldn't compromise the Queen. Some sources say that she employed Derham as her secretary. However, it is more likely that she employed him as a gentleman usher on the 27th of August 1541. Philippa Gregory asserts that Katheryn gave Derham, amongst others, these roles at court because rumours of Katheryn's previous indiscretions continued to haunt her, and she was forced to give favours and positions in return for silence. But was this the case? Derham held information that could severely damage Katheryn's reputation, and he likely intended to use it to his advantage. Katheryn warned him to take heed what words you speak. When the king inquired about her employing Derham, she explained that the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk had requested her to be kind to him, adding, "And so I will." In her book, Six Wives of King Henry VIII, Alison Weir states, Derham had a fiery temper and was over-familiar with his royal mistress, arousing the dislike of many who felt that Katheryn was giving him preferential treatment. Katheryn was always susceptible to male flattery and attention, and there were those in her household and at the court who were strongly attracted to her and jealous of Derham's influence. During their absence, a Protestant named John Lascelles approached Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, claiming to possess knowledge about Katheryn's past that could cast doubt on her marriage to the king. Lascelles had wrestled with his conscience before coming forward, seeing an opportunity to replace Katheryn with a queen who would champion the reformist cause, similar to Anne Boleyn. Cranmer listened to John Lascelles' account, which revolved around his sister Mary's prior association with Katheryn. Mary, before her marriage to Mr. Hall, resided with Katheryn in the ladies' dormitory at the Duchess of Norfolk's residence in Lambeth. Intrigued, Cranmer summoned Mary Hall, whose information matched that of her brothers. Mary recounted specific details, far more precise than her brother had, including an incident where one of the household ladies, Dorothy Barwick, had disclosed that Manox was engaged to Katheryn, with whom he was much in love.
The cheek, the nerve, the gall, the audacity and the gumption.
Manox, despite his audacity, had no rightful claim to engage himself to a daughter of the Howards, prompting Mary Hall to take it upon herself to reprimand him for his inappropriate conduct. However, Katheryn's affections were fickle, and shortly thereafter she redirected her attention to Francis Derham. Their relationship rapidly escalated, and soon, as recounted by Mrs. Hall, they became intimate partners. According to her testimony, for over 100 nights, Derham clandestinely entered the ladies' dormitory and, dressed in doublet and hose, joined Katheryn in her bed. The other women and girls sharing the room were left with little doubt about the nature of their activities, as the sounds that were made from behind the drawn bed curtains made the situation quite clear. In fact, one maid refused to sleep nearby due to Katheryn not knowing what matrimony was. Manox, fueled by resentment, spread rumours that he was aware of a distinct mark on Katheryn's body. He confided in Mary Hall, expressing his intention to confront Katheryn about her relationship with Derham. However, Mary advised him to remain silent, expressing her disgust at Katheryn's conduct and urging him to refrain from interfering. For if she holds on as she begins, we shall hear she will be naught within a while. Cranmer was also informed that Henry Manox had boasted that he could pick the Queen's privates from all others by a privy mark, and that Derham was so familiar with Katheryn afore her marriage to the king that he did lie with her 100 nights in the year in his doublet and hose, a bed between the sheets.
It's not going to go well. It just isn't. It's going to be an accident. We just don't know what sort of accident.
In September 1541, Katheryn Howard and Thomas Culpeper continued to see each other and exchanged gifts. The logistics of arranging these secret encounters, coupled with the intense anxiety Katheryn felt about the potential danger of her actions, began to take a toll on her. Her female staff noticed her increasingly erratic behaviour and short temper. They found it peculiar that none of her ladies, except Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, were permitted to enter her chambers unless specifically summoned. This unusual restriction raised eyebrows among her attendants, who sensed the tension and secrecy surrounding the Queen's actions. On the 26th of October 1541, the royal entourage returned to Windsor, and a few days later proceeded to Hampton Court. During this time, Katheryn Howard maintained her secret meetings with Thomas Culpeper. Her behaviour became increasingly suspicious to her servants as she began sending them to Lady Rochford with cryptic and puzzling messages, which were met with equally perplexing replies. These mysterious exchanges only heightened the curiosity and concern of those around her. The King and Queen arrived at Hampton Court Palace on the 30th of October 1541. The next day, the 1st of November 1541, a special Thanksgiving service took place where Henry publicly thanked God in the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court for blessing him with the perfect wife. I render thanks to thee, O Lord, that after so many strange accidents that have befallen my marriage, thou hast been pleased to give me a wife so entirely confirmed to my inclinations as her I now have. However, this was also the day that Cranmer decided to pass on his knowledge to the king. He rather cowardly had written a letter to the king with information about his queen's past, and then left the letter for Henry to find on his seat in the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court. The king did not read the note until he was back at his chamber. Initially, Henry did not believe these tales about his wife. But that's not to say he wasn't stunned at the allegations.
I'm not saying I wasn't a little surprised.
Henry was sure that someone was trying to discredit his queen, and he demanded that Cranmer investigate the truth about these allegations and punish the ones responsible for these lies. You are not to desist until you have got to the bottom of the pot. However, not willing to take any chances, the king also ordered for both the Queen and Lady Rochford to be confined until the Queen's name had been cleared. Katheryn and her ladies were practising their dance steps when the King's guards arrived, telling them that it was no more time to dance. After dismissing most of the Queen's servants, Katheryn, troubled by more than just her premarital affairs with Manox and Derham, became extremely distressed and demanded to know the reason for her confinement. The guards, however, could not provide any answers. In all honesty, she probably suspected the reason, and in the days that followed, the weight of this knowledge left her unable to eat or sleep. And on that note, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. If you like this video, then make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for part 4, where we'll be exploring Katheryn's final days. But until then, have a wonderful day.